Shalom Aleichem. Peace upon you and welcome to Biblical Faith, where we're going to continue this week and we're going to just jump right on in and get after it. Continue this week looking at the four levels of Jewish interpretation. As they are applied to the Torah, we saw them. They produce, the Peshat level produces the Mishnah, the 7 laws of Rabbi Hillel. The Remez level, the 13 laws of Rabbi Ishmael, produces the Gemara. Then the Midrashim are produced, that's the Drosh level, the 32 laws of Rabbi Eliezer ben Galil. And finally we come to the Sod, which is the 42 laws of Kabbalah. Now, the Sod, or the mystery level, or the secret level. Now, I want to reiterate again, especially in case this is the first time you've come onto the show and suddenly you heard this word come out of my mouth, Kabbalah, which most Christians run from with all their heart, and most Jews do too. And they should. I'm not telling them that they shouldn't, but I am telling them that there is a legitimate Kabbalah in the sense that it is one of the levels of interpretation. It has existed for a long time. It was existing even in the days of Jesus, and even though it wasn't anything written down about it until the Middle Ages, but it was still very much a level of interpretation. So I discourage you from Kabbalah, especially modern Kabbalah. I discourage you very much from it. But I do want you to see that it is a legitimate level of interpretation in Judaism. And not only that, but that we have it in the New Testament also. Now we have seen, can't review too much, but how we find parallels to these four levels of interpretation in the Gospels. And how the Peshat is parallel to the Gospel of Mark, and how the Remez level, I'm standing in the way, the Remez level is parallel to the Gospel of Luke, and how the Drosh, the searching level of the 32 laws of Rabbi Eliezer ben Galil, is parallel to Matityahu, or Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, which is the King Gospel, the Gospel of the King. Now we come to the last level, the Sod, which is the secret, and somebody says, oh, that's that mystical stuff. Well, hold on. You know, if you are really and truly a Christian, you too are a mystic. Did you know that? You know what a mystic really is? A mystic is somebody who believes in something that he has not seen. That's what a mystic is. He believes in someone or something that he has not seen. So I very strongly suggest to you that you also, if you're really a true Christian believer, that you also are a mystic. Whether you know it or not, you are, because you believe in someone you have not seen. Okay, so the Sod, the secret level, and do we find a parallel? Of course we do. How could it be any other way? And we find it in the Gospel of John. Now listen, can't you see it? Anybody who has ever read the Gospels, this just rolls over them. Because we have the Mark, the simple, the literal level interpretation, Luke, the hint level, and Matthew, or Matityahu, the Midrashic level. These are what's called the Synoptic Gospels. And you know why they're called the Synoptic Gospels? Because people who came along later on, not knowing the Jewish tradition of the four levels of interpretation, said they're all telling the same story. They're telling the same story, but somebody copied things wrong. This is what we came up with, you know. It's a school called higher criticism, came up with 150 years ago or so. We've only, I'm laughing because according to the school of higher criticism, you know, we just didn't get intelligent enough to figure this out until then. But basically what it amounts to is 2,000 years worth of Christian neglect of the four Jewish levels of interpretation. You know, Jerome, the fellow who translated the Bible into Latin, the Vulgate, which the Catholic Church uses to this day, he makes a very interesting statement. He says, we know that the Jews have a method of interpretation based on 13 laws, but we also know that our spiritual method is much better. Now that blows me away, because the spiritual method is the method that the church used to take everything away, take all the meat out of Scripture, take all the meaning out of Scripture, to make it say, I don't know what it means, but it can't mean what it says. It just can't mean what it says. That's the spiritualizing way, which has it's a terrible thing. A terrible thing. So Jerome knew about the 13 laws of Rabbi Ishmael. He knew about them. But the spiritual way he thought was better. The spiritual way of interpretation that the church was using was better. So the higher criticism comes along, you know, separated all this time. And by the way, higher criticism, you know, the rabbis have a comment about higher criticism. They say higher criticism is higher anti-Semitism, because the higher critics really come against the Jews in the Gospels, in Israel, in Judaism. It's unbelievable. But the critics come along and they say, okay, let's see, the Gospel of Mark, it has to be first. And then comes along somebody, Luke, and he copies from Mark, but he also has to copy from somebody else. And it's a source that they call Q. They name this source because nobody's ever seen this source. Nobody's ever found this source. Nobody knows what it looks like. Nobody knows anything about it. It's just an unknown source. And then Matthew comes along and he copies from Luke. He copies Luke's gospel, and he also copies from Mark, but he also copies from Q. And it gets so confusing that nobody knows who copied who or where the Q is. I mean, it's so confusing. Whereas if we would just have figured out that these things, the Gospels are presenting to us the living Torah, a person according to their level of interpretation. Mark presents him the literal, plain sense meaning. Luke presents him according to the 13 laws, the hint, the remez. He is the hint. He hints constantly. Matthew comes along and presents him as the king of the midrash, the king of the parable, all of those things, the king in the kingdom. They go together, those three levels. Those three levels go together very, very nicely, just as the three synoptic gospels go together very, very nicely. My point is that higher criticism, throw it out. Really and truly, throw it out. And begin to look at the Gospels, not that they should form a harmony. You know, people, listen, I can remember taking some Bible courses one time at a big Christian university, and we spent the vast majority of our time trying to figure out how to harmonize the Gospels when a harmony is not what's meant. Can anybody imagine what it would be to try to harmonize the Mishnah, the Gemara, and the Midrashim? It's an absolute impossibility. I want to suggest to you that it's also an impossibility with the Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels. They weren't meant to be that way. Each one of them is presenting a picture of Yeshua from his level of interpretation. You say, well, there's conflicts between them. So what? You think there's not conflicts? I don't mean contradictions. I mean conflicts, but of the way people tell stories and the way people say things in the Mishnah or the Gemara or the Midrashim. Of course there is. Just like there is in the Gospels. Just like there is. They're not meant to be a harmony. They're not meant to be synoptic. They're not meant to be chronological, step-by-step deal of his life. Wow. I didn't mean to get all wound up on that. I meant to talk to you about the sod, the secret level. You see how these three go together, though? And the Gospel of John, anybody who has read the Gospels knows that the Gospel of John stands as far apart from the synoptic Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke as the Zohar does from these other rabbinic writings. In fact, it's not even in the it's not in the same it's not even in the same ballpark. It's a completely different ball game. It's a completely different thing. Why? Because the sod level wants its interest is God Himself and heaven and the spirit world and how that world operates and the operation of that world, what effect it has on this world. Now you think about the Gospel of John for a minute. It's also very, very much involved in numbers, gematria, what's called gematria. It's very, very much involved in the deity, the divine world. Wants to talk. That's all it wants to talk about. I mean, this is its sphere. Now you think about the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John comes and it immediately presents to us Yeshua as the living Torah, and it gets this idea from a Kabbalistic thought. I mean, we can find it. We can find it. Then it begins to tell us its interpretation of Yeshua through what? 7 miracles. Why? Why does he pick 7? By the way, he tells us, we see how arranged this book is. This book is super arranged. It certainly is not a chronology. in any shape, form, or fashion. It is an arranged book, as we would expect a Kabbalistic work done on the soul level to be, because it's arranged to us to show us a particular picture. Why? Because John presents Yeshua as the Son of God. That's why. That's why he does it that way. And he arranges it. 7 miracles. This is Gematria. 7. Complete, a perfect picture he's going to present to us in these 7 miracles that Yeshua does. And let's take a look. Look on over in, listen. Can't we tell we're in a different ballpark altogether? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God, which comes straight from Kabbalah. All things were made by Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made. In Him was life, and the life was the light of men. Can you tell we're in a little different ball game than over here? The way let's see, the way the Gospel of Mark opens, the beginning of the Gospel of Yeshua. A little different, isn't it? As it is written in the prophets, behold, I send my messenger before your face. A little bit different. He talks about that same messenger, but listen to the way John puts it. John puts it on a completely different level. There was a man, verse 6, sent from God, whose name was Yochanan, whose name was John. The same came for a witness, to bear witness, a testimony. Another Kabbalistic concept of the light, capital L, the Ein Sof. You remember the radiance we talked about, the light without end, the light that comes out from behind the letters. That's what he's talking about, that all men through him might believe. He was not that light, but he was sent to bear witness of that light. That was the true light. You see, it's when I read John, it's absolutely unbelievably amazing, because he is presenting it from the mystery level, the level of what was unseen, the level of what was behind the letters, the level of, we have to say, Kabbalah. That's the only way we can call it. And I don't know how else to do it. Another example of this, look at chapter 2. Now look what John does all the time. We see an overemphasis, not an overemphasis, but we see him constantly playing with numbers. 7 miracles. Now look what he does. In chapter 2, it begins, and the 3rd day, we've counted a day, he'll say this all the time. After so many days, I'm just trying to look and find some others. After so many days, such and such happened. Or Jesus took and did such and such, so many things. The key to his whole book, though, is back over here in the very end of it, the very end of the Gospel of John. And by the way, people are always sending me questions on the great contradictions between the Gospel of John and the Synoptic Gospels. I want to tell you there aren't any contradictions. It's just simple fact that John is writing on a completely different level, and he presents to us a completely different picture. My goodness, these writers, I'm telling you, such Jews they were, such rabbis they were, that they could take the hermeneutical laws and apply them not to the text, but to a person. Apply them to a person, that's unbelievable. That's really something. Such Jews they were, and yet we think they are writing historical, absolutely down to the last second accounts. No, they're not. They're presenting a picture. They're presenting a picture to us of the living Torah. And we do them an injustice when we come to them and demand that they read like a history book. We do them a great injustice. Now, the key to the Gospel of John is back over here. The theme of his Gospel, the key, here we go. I'll get it. In chapter 20, in verse 30, where John says, and many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. You see what he's trying to say? These aren't the only miracles Jesus did. I went and I picked out 7 of them to give you a picture. A picture of what? Of him as the Son of God. Why? Because John is very interested. John writes on the level of Kabbalah. Can't we get a hold of that? It's not such a big deal. It's really not such a big deal. He goes on, but these are written that you might believe that Jesus is the Mashiach, the Son of God, and that believing you might have life through his name. Now, it's absolutely amazing to me that there is another book, and although we find lots of Kabbalah in the writings of Paul also, we find lots of the sod level of interpretation. Like where he talks about one day, I knew a man, whether in the body or out of the body, I don't know. He got caught up to the third heaven. What in the world is he talking about? Do you know what he's talking about? He's talking about things that Kabbalistic rabbis talk about in the Zohar, about gaining access into the throne room of God and actually going to that place. And Paul talks about it in the exact same kind of words. He doesn't know whether he was in the body or out of the body. Excuse me. But he talks about it in the same kind of words. We mentioned already the whole concept of where Paul talks about where Yeshua empties himself, where God empties himself in order to come. And the Kabbalists say God has to stoop down, he has to lower himself, he has to go through this process in order to have any kind of fellowship with us. But now we come, there are two books, what I'm trying to say, in the New Testament, actually three. I just thought of another one. All written by the same man, all very, very much concerned with the sod, the secret level of interpretation, the sod level. One is the Gospel of John, far and above the other Gospels, not even connected to them really. Just like Kabbalah is not connected to the other three levels of interpretation, far and above, in a different world. It's in a different world, in a different place, not connected. The Gospel of John is one. The letter of 1 John also is one, when he writes the letter of 1 John. And the other one is the book of the Revelation. The book of Revelation. For instance, let's just go there for a second. For instance, I won't walk, Lisa. We'll just do it right from here. In Revelation 13, this is, well, maybe I will. You better watch me. In Revelation 13, there's a very interesting story that's told. It says, beginning in verse 11, it says, I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and he spoke like a dragon. That's in chapter 13 and verse 11. And he exercises all the power of the first beast before him, and causes the earth and them who dwell on it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. He does great wonders, so that he makes fire come down out of heaven. Now let's jump. Verse 15. And he had power, this is what I want to get to. He had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he caused all, rich and poor, and he goes on and on and on. Look at verse 18, it says, Here is wisdom, let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, which is vav, vav, vav. Vav in Hebrew is number 6. And his number is 666, 666, so 3 vavs on this man. Okay, what in the world could John be talking about there? Well, we think in the modern age, certainly he is talking about, I just need a little room to write just so we can get this. He is talking about computer image or something, or maybe even a robot that somehow the false prophet causes to live. In Kabbalah, there is a very, we talked about before the name of God, the Yud He Vav He is representative of 2 different names of God. One is 42 letters, just like there are 42 laws of Kabbalah, and the other is 72 letters. In Kabbalah, they are very much preoccupied with learning this name and pronouncing it correctly. This is a great secret of Kabbalah, and which is why I'm not trying to encourage you to go into it. You stay away from here. I'm just trying to tell you it's a valid level of interpretation. Now, in the old days, the rabbis tell a story about when someone who knew how to correctly pronounce the name of God, they practiced it. They made a mud man. This mud man is called a golem. They made a mud man called a golem. And by the way, if you attached a picture, something from someone in life to the mud man, he would take on his image. Now, they would pronounce the name of God over him, over the mud man, the golem, and if they pronounced it correctly, because this is the name of God, it has power. If they pronounced it correctly, guess what? The golem came to life. The golem could be taught to speak, but he is a soulless creature. And by the way, they would write this word, emet, which means they would write this word on his arm or on his forehead somewhere. Emet, truth, okay? In order to destroy the Gulam, they would come and mark out the Aleph, rub it out, and now it spells Met, death, and the Gulam would die. I want to tell you, if we read Revelation chapter 13 and those things where he says, let's read it again, where he says, and he has power to give life to the image of the beast. Now, as a Jew who has studied, who probably knows just enough Kabbalah to get himself in trouble, which is why I'm trying to shoo you away from it, and at the same time, you should know about it enough that you understand that it's a legitimate level of interpretation. But to a Jew who knows a little Kabbalah, that reads very much like the creation of a golem, which could be raised up in the image of a person, according to them, and then destroyed if he got out of hand. You see what I'm saying? Because a golem is a dangerous thing, can be a dangerous thing. Well, my goodness, we could go on with this, and we will, by the way, because you see, we have really put another level on what we've been looking at. When we first began looking at the relationship of Israel and their mirror image of the Mashiach himself, and then we looked at the covenants, the promises that God made, and his requirements, all of those things, and how he deals with us in covenants. And then we looked at the Hebrew world of Jesus, and now we have looked at the Jewish levels of interpretation and gotten an even more Jewish, in-depth Jewish picture of the New Testament and the things that are going on there. Now you know what we can do? We can really and truly start to study, and that's what we're going to do in the months to come, in the programs to come, if the Mashiach keeps tarrying, you know? You remember the song, I believe with perfect, complete faith in the coming of the Messiah, in the coming of the Mashiach, and even though he tarries, even though he didn't come when I wanted, I still will wait for him. So we'll keep waiting for him, and we'll keep studying. But I'm telling you that what we have been doing over the past few weeks and the levels of interpretation, I hope it's been interesting to you, but it will also be foundational for us in what we do in some of our future studies. You see, I cannot read the Gospel of John without in the back of my mind knowing that he is interpreting the life of Jesus from a Kabbalistic, from a sod level. I can't read the Gospel of Matthew without in the back of my mind knowing that he is using the 32 laws of Rabbi Eliezer ben Galil to make a midrash to tell us the story of the king. I can't read Luke without seeing the 13 laws of Rabbi Ishmael and how Luke hints. Oh, he's so good. Luke is such a, I don't know how to describe him. He has it together, I tell you. And he makes so many hints to so much of the Hebrew Scriptures in order to make us his commentary, his Gemara upon the living Torah, Yeshua. I can't read the Gospel of Mark without seeing that he is codifying things concerning the living Torah, concerning Jesus. He is codifying them into the tractates, into the subject matter of the Mishnah. Why? Because he is using the 7 laws of the great Rabbi Hillel the Great. So, all of those things, I hope will be in the back of your mind the next time you read the Gospels, the next time you look at them. And once you get it and get familiar with some of these things, I guarantee you they will never be the same to you. And you will find out the rabbis are right. Each word of the Torah, not only does it have 7 meanings, not only does it have 70 meanings, it has any number of meanings, a myriad number of meanings, whatever the Ruach HaKodesh needs to show you, needs to point out to you that day in your study. Whatever your need is, in other words, the Word of God, that's their point. What is your need? Whatever your need is, what you need for this day, God is your Father who is in heaven. He's your Heavenly Father. And He knows exactly what you have need of, but you have to pick up His Word and you have to read it in order for Him to talk to you sometimes, in order for Him to get across to you what the meaning of the Word is for you today. And I encourage you to do that. If I never encourage you to do anything else, maybe I don't encourage you to go and study Jewish, the Mishnah or the Gemara or any of those things. But listen, you got a Bible, it's in English, I'm telling you, you can still get a lot out of it, even though probably some of the translation is maybe translated not quite correctly in the sense that Unfortunately, lots of our translations are done by people who don't like Israel too much. So they soften some things and change other things. But still, you have a Bible. Read it. Read it, read it, read it. Put it into you. Put it into you. That's what the Jewish people do. Till the next time, I want to tell you, Shalom Uvracha, peace and a blessing.
Thank you for joining us in our study. If you enjoyed this study and are interested in learning more from the Torah and the sages of Israel, then check us out on the internet at www.bfm101.com, or you may contact us toll-free at 1-800-639-0169. Our mailing address is Biblical Faith, P.O. Box 2, Abilene, Texas 79604. Until next time, we wish you Shalom Uvracha, peace and a blessing.